Hello and welcome to Book of the Mouse Club, episode 49, Wednesday, December 16th, 2020.
Morning, monsieur.
Where are you off to?
The bookshop. I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and
That's nice. Marie! The baguettes! Hurry up!
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
I almost bounced clear out of the book. Some bouncing, huh?
Come home or make myself known.
J. Thaddeus Turtle, Esquire. Have you never met him? You will find his story in this delightful little book, The Wind and the Willows.
I've come to return the book I borrowed.
Finished already?
Oh, I couldn't put it down. Have you got anything new?
Welcome back. I'm your host, Courtney, and I'm joined as always by my lovely co-host, Emily.
Hi, Courtney, and welcome back, listeners. This is our first two-part episode. Courtney, are you ready to talk about Marc Davis in his own words, Volume 2?
Absolutely. In the past, we've discussed books in a series like Kingdom Keepers or our themed Summer Cinema Series Celebration, which I just wanted an excuse to say again. But this pair of episodes is our first two-parter discussing both volumes of Marc Davis, in his own words, Imagineering the Disney Parks, since they span over 700 pages combined between those volumes. If you haven't listened to episode 48, where we discussed Volume 1, I encourage you to do so now. In that episode, Emily gives a great overview of Marc's life and legacy, and we discuss the chapters in the book that covered Marc's career through the passing of Walt Disney. Most of our listeners probably did join us for that episode, but would you mind giving us a quick recap since it's been a month, Emily?
Sure, will do. So our last episode, we explored Volume 1 of the full title, Marc Davis in his own words, Imagineering the Disney Parks by Pete Docter and Christopher Merritt. Volume 1 followed Marc's career from animator to the beginnings of his time as an Imagineer at WED. Volume 1 gave us a great overview of Marc's relationship with Walt Disney and his wife Alice Davis, and also provided artwork and anecdotes about Marc's contributions to classic attractions such as Pirates of the Caribbean, The Jungle Cruise, Tiki Room, and our favorite section about the World's Fair attractions. We're going to pick up now where Volume 1 is immediately continued by Volume 2. Interestingly, without transition or even without new page numbers, it just picks up right at page 369. So Courtney, let's jump right into this. Volume 2 picks up immediately with the Haunted Mansion. Marc is one of many contributors to the classic attraction, which the chapter talks about a lot of the turmoil of going back and forth between too many cooks in the kitchen, maybe. But do you have a favorite Marc element of this attraction?
For me, it's the graveyard scene, which is kind of like the culmination of the ride. You certainly have, kind of like the hitchhiking ghost to follow you home on the way out, which are also Marc Davis elements. But once you leave the attic and travel into the graveyard, those moments just feel like signature Marc Davis. A lot of his artwork is very gag-based. We talked in the previous episode about Jungle Cruise and the gags he inspired there. You've said a little bit about how there's so many contributors to the Haunted Mansion, and sometimes I think you can kind of tell that there's more macabre or dark elements of it early in the ride, but once you get to that final scene, that just feels completely Marc Davis to me. What about you?
Courtney, for once we don't have the same answer.
Uh-oh.
I'm very excited. You didn't see, but when you said the graveyard scene, I did a little dance because I'm going to have a different response. So my favorite scene in the whole attraction is the ballroom and all the ghosts eating and dancing. I love the Pepper's Ghost illusion. But my favorite small section of that room is the dueling ghosts that come out of the painting. So when you're passing the room, it's in the far upper left-hand corner by the organ, and I look for that every time. I look at the dancers, look at everybody, and then I stare at that corner to wait for the duelers to come out of the frames. And I was so excited reading this chapter to learn that that was one of his gag ideas, and that a lot of the stuff happening in the ballroom scene, like what people were doing at the tables, the guy on the chandelier, that those were all of his ideas.
I also appreciate that, not everything is funny moments. On page 428 is a section from the Haunted Mansion called A Watchful Hallway, and those are those portraits where the eyes follow you. Now, they are in the hallway when you leave the stretching room at Disneyland, but I remember, and I'm sure you do as a kid at Walt Disney World, now it's also Marc Davis images where the light flashes and they change. But when we were kids, do you remember the creepy eyes would follow you, as you kept moving past, and they would move with you based on optical illusion? Those are kind of creepy paintings, so that's very much a different side of Marc Davis's artwork style. So it was nice to kind of remember and look back on those. But I also appreciated seeing a lot of unused concept art. We've talked to authors who have written about the Haunted Mansion in the past and kind of the story of all of the cooks in the kitchen for that attraction. So it makes sense to me that, as we've learned, this attraction went through a lot of development before it opened. So I appreciated seeing different ghosts that, didn't make their way to the mansion, or at least haven't materialized for us guests before our own
There
eyes.
is always room for one more.
There is.
So we just gotta pick one.
That was a lot of fun, but interesting to me, as you said, that this chapter kind of just picked up in a different book. It ended and it moved. So I think a significant portion and transition, as I mentioned in our intro, is that Volume 1 does briefly touch on the passing of Walt Disney, which happened as Marc and these teams were working on Pirates of the Caribbean and the Haunted Mansion. We got a full look of Pirates of the Caribbean in Volume 1, and Haunted Mansion split between those. So shortly thereafter, it talks about Walt Disney's passing. And I think almost every book or documentary that we've read or seen about Imagineers or people who worked with Walt, like the Sherman Brothers, it usually shares their story of their final moments with Walt or where they were when they learned of his passing. It's usually a tough moment. Marc is no exception. I'd love to know what you thought of Marc's memories of his goodbye.
So when I first came across this page, so this is pages 442 and 443 in the book. Sorry, if you heard my pages flipping, I was trying to find the page. And it's called The Final Visit. And at first, when you glance at it, it's probably the two pages with the most text or the longest speaking from Marc. So at first I was like, ooh, there's a lot here. But it ended up being one of my favorite parts of the book to read. I won't lie, the same way as you and I, even though we've read Bob Thomas's biography multiple times, I still get a little misty-eyed.
Of course.
And his story, I think, is so unique. I mean, every Imagineer story of their last time with Walt is unique, but I think Marc had such an interesting relationship. Because I thought about when we read It's Kind of Cute Story of Raleigh Crump, I feel like Walt and Raleigh had more of a joking relationship where they took jabs at each other and it was more outwardly fun. Whereas I feel like Marc and Walt had kind of a more reserved relationship. And I love that people commented and Marc felt that, especially when Walt said goodbye, Marc. So I have it here. Marc says, I stepped in my doorway and watched them walk down, and he went down, got down to maybe 20 feet or so, and then he stopped, and he turned and he said, goodbye, Marc. And he never said that to me before. He never said goodbye. He said, let's get together, or see you later, or how about next Tuesday? I never saw him alive again, and this just overwhelmed me, and I've never forgotten it. He really did know he was going, and he really said goodbye to me. Probably the last laugh he ever saw were these bear drawings, in reference to Country Bear Jamboree. And something that because then I reflected back to Volume 1 of them going around the World's Fair together, that Walt just always seemed to take Marc with him. And maybe they didn't talk very much. They weren't joking very much, but he always wanted Marc around. And I thought it was just very touching that Marc even reflected, he's like, I could tell Walt just went out of his way to just come to my office.
Yeah, it was definitely a moving moment, but I also felt that he had some regrets, which isn't something people are usually as forthcoming about. He kind of maybe regretted the little joke and jab that he made to him in that moment, or how he teased Walt. So it was a little like bittersweet for me to read. I kind of felt sad for Mark in that regard. Like he didn't have as many fond memories of that moment as maybe other people that I've heard share. A similar story to the Sherman Brothers too, though, where they said, and we discussed this in the last episode about Walt in general, that he's not very forthcoming about compliments. And Mark notices that Walt had never said goodbye, and he specifically said, "Goodbye, Mark," instead of "see you real soon." And for the Sherman Brothers, their last moment, from what I recall, like he gives them a compliment, like, let's say, "Good work, boys," or "You've done great." And they're like, "Oh, that was weird." He never is usually that forthcoming with compliments. So I found it an interesting parallel between.
And I think it's something that persists throughout volume 2, that even other Imagineers, so we start to hear more contemporary voices like Tony Baxter come into, there's a lot of Tony Baxter actually in this volume, and some other Imagineers that I can't remember exactly where the page is, and I'm going to paraphrase, but a couple times people remark that Mark always thought, would Walt like this? What would Walt do? And his reference was always back to Walt, especially as there's this new transition in WED to new management and, or transition in the whole Disney company to new management after Walt's passing, particularly after Walt Disney World opened. I think so even after the passing of Roy Disney, that people notice while everyone else is focusing on what would maybe sell or what's going to be good financially for the park, he always thought of what would Walt want me to do right now. And he always operated the way he always operated with Walt. And there was another quote where someone was like, "Mark, everyone's left for the day." And he's like, "I still work here. Like, I know Walt's going to walk in that door and want to see what I have to work on." So I saw that theme persist throughout the volume, that I think Walt's passing, like all Imagineers, continue to really influence his work ethic and his style and his approach.
That moment about his work ethic is, I read the last 3 chapters kind of in succession. I just got on a roll. I was reading them one at a time just so I didn't hurt my back. We talked about that on Twitter.
Yeah, it's an awkward book to hold and read.
Twitter friend Ellen. But I got to like the 3rd to last chapter and I was like, it's Epcot, I can keep going. I'm like, well, I made it to the epilogue. So I'm not sure exactly which of the chapters it was about that moment where like someone said, "Go home, Mark," and he said, "No, Walt would want me here. I'm still acting like he could come in the door at any time." I think it was nice to see that throughout. Like this, I wouldn't say it opens with Walt's passing, but Haunted Mansion is in the middle of that. We get more details kind of a little later in that chapter about the passing in those moments. But I definitely saw that thread as well.
Oh, I found it. So it's on page 696, Phil Mendez. So this is when he's working on ideas for the American Pavilion in Epcot. And Phil says, "I remember one time that we had a 4-day weekend and everyone was leaving early on Thursday. So most of WED was closed down. I walked by Mark's office and he was still sitting there, watercoloring. It was maybe 5 o'clock and I said, 'Mark, go home. Everyone's gone.' And he looked up from his work and he said, 'Phil, I work here every day as if Walt is going to walk around that corner. I'm staying here until I finish what I have set to do for today.' And he did. Back then I thought it was kind of strange because he didn't work just for himself. He worked for Walt Disney. And that was his whole situation. When he talked about things, it was always like, what did Walt want? What did Walt want this to be? Can we make it better for Walt? He didn't work for the guys who were running Disney Studios. That's what I think most people didn't understand."
Yeah, I found a similar moment on page 438 in the Country Bears chapter. I was just enjoying seeing all different sketches for bears, concept art of bears that never made it into that show. And there's such a cute one of like this stout little bear playing a big old tuba. And the quote said, "I had a bear playing a tuba and I'm sorry I didn't get him in. Walt loved that one. He laughed so hard. I've always liked him, and I'm still upset that I never found a place for it." Like, his regret about the attraction is that, this bear, this sketch, this made Walt laugh, and audiences don't get to see that.
So that was probably my favorite moment of the book overall. I don't know I have to think about both volumes, but I think that was the most impactful because, again, I took those themes throughout. And he says, yeah, after Country Bears, he holds Country Bears very dearly because it's the last attraction sketches he got to show Walt. So it's the last artwork of his that he and Walt shared. And speaking of Country Bears, let's jump back on a lighter note. Country Bears is an attraction that I have said, I know definitely to you, that it's underappreciated. And going into this, I did not realize that Marc was its main designer. But I know this is an attraction that you and Doug particularly love. So I wanted to ask what you love about Country Bears.
How do I put into words what I love about Country Bears? I didn't like this show as a kid. I don't know. I feel like I reached a certain age where it's like, I want to go ride Space Mountain. I want to go ride Splash Mountain. I want to ride, like, I was just like, go, go, go. Let's go use our fast passes. So, like, anything that slowed down my day at Disney when I was like 10, I was like, why are we sitting here? I don't want to watch this. But in my adulthood, once I came back, once I came to Disney for my Disney college program, like, I'm an adult, I'm here, I live here, a day at the park doesn't have to be a rope drop to wishes kind of day. It's at my own pace. I just loved it. And I took Doug there on his very first trip, which is a month into my college program. He came to visit. And I was more like, let's pop in here. You'll like animatronics. You've studied theater, film, and television. This is an extension of that as like a live performance, but with animatronic bears. I don't know, just go with me here. And I think he just laughed so hard on it. And when you have a partner and you see them take joy in something, like, you adopt that affinity for it as well. He thought, it's hokey, it's fun. I feel like there's stuff in there that I even question, like, how is this still running? Things like, Mama, don't whoop little Buford. I think you should shoot him instead. And you're like, wait a second. Yeah, I love taking people there now, like, who've never been to Disney to see it for the first time, because they'll just be so surprised. And you can even hear, like, every audience, when Big Al shows up, it gets a big laugh. So I really think that speaks to the timelessness of Marc's designs. And he spoke about in his designs, like, they're very stylized bears. He really tried to make them different shapes, different sizes. It's not like you're just going to animate a real life bear and they all look the same. I think he really tried to put personality into these drawings, and then when they were sculpted by his fellow Imagineers and put on stage, they really do come to life in such a fun way. So that is why I love Country Bears.
And as a designer, I really think Country Bears, I don't want to say it's the climax, but he finally gets in a rhythm with like, not that he didn't before with Blaine Gibson. Shoot, his name is, Blaine Gibson. But they finally, I think it's this attraction, he says that the animatronics looked so much like his drawings, and finally, like, the sculptors and the mechanics at WED understood Marc, and Marc understood them, and they were just so in sync about how to make things happen in animatronic form, that Country Bears really came together. I had to laugh when you said parts that, like, I can't believe this is in a Disney attraction. My favorite part, or still in a Disney attraction, my favorite part of the show is the Sunbonnet Trio.
Love
Bunny,
that.
Bubbles, and Beulah. And they sing the wonderful song, All the Guys That Turn Me On, Turn Me Down.
And they say, a guy who gets me shook. And I swear every time the audience is shook.
Such modern language for...
It's classic.
An attraction.
Almost 50 years. 50 years strong. Nearly.
But that one... Like you said, when we were kids, like, all this kind of went over your head.
Oh, absolutely.
I did not get it. I was just like, oh, there's bears singing songs. This is cute. I think
that plays into it, too. Like, movies... This is, like, my love for Hocus Pocus, which is a whole different tangent. Like, oh, yeah, that's fun. I enjoyed watching it as a kid. Like, I really took to it. But then, like, flash forward 15 years into my future, I got some of the jokes, and just it made my appreciation for that film twofold. Whereas here I was like, maybe I wasn't so into it as a kid, but then as an adult I'm like, oh man, that didn't register before.
And it's so interesting that the idea of Country Bear Jamboree came about from Mineral King.
Yeah, fascinating
that blew
concept.
my mind, because that took me back to when we looked at Don Hahn's Yesterday's Tomorrow and we read that chapter. And kind of a theme that I did see in volume 2 as well is how many things, either from things that were unrealized that then Mark turned into something like this. Like Mineral King was unrealized, but we got a small piece of it. But then we have other attractions of Mark's that are unrealized, but then we get a small piece of it from another Imagineer. So the tidbits are amazing. But isn't that crazy that Country Bear Jamboree at some point was going to be in a ski lodge as like an evening show to help encourage people to stay at the lodge longer. And now it's in Walt Disney World and Disneyland. So Courtney, to wrap up about Country Bear Jamboree, do you and Doug have a favorite bear?
I think we're both big fans of Trixie and Big Al.
Big Al is great. I just want to hug Big Al. Like, he is the definition of a giant teddy bear.
I also, as a kid, I had an affinity for, there's the 5 bear band that opens up the show, but seated with them is the little bear who's holding a teddy bear. And I found out in this book he has a name. On page 462, it just said, Baby Oscar. This is another one of the little guys in front. Each had a little voice that we discovered fit this sort of thing. And I just always thought that little baby Oscar was so cute. And now I know a name. So now I'm like deep into the Country Bear Jamboree lore.
I did appreciate having all of the bears' images labeled with their names, because I feel like I don't keep them all straight when I'm listening to the show.
Yes. Zeke and Zed and Ted and Fred and bar named Tennessee. But I'm like, I don't know which one is which.
I'll never forget one day you and I were in Frontierland. I think this was during my program, and the Country Bears came out and they were just like roaming around, and you freaked out. You're like, Liver Lips McGraw.
That sounds like something I would absolutely do.
He was so happy that someone knew his name.
Oh my gosh. That's absolutely, anytime I meet the Country Bears, there's Wendell. So there's a few of them that I know, because Wendell is the one who sings Mama Don't Whip Little Beef. I know the ones that have their own songs. It's like Liver Lips McGraw. They get a full introduction. Yeah. But the 5 bear band, I'm like, I don't know which one's which. But I love when the Country Bears come out at the parks, because they just have so much fun. They can do like whatever they want. Maybe when I was a teen, we were in the park kind of early. It must have been extra magic hours. And I remember we were heading towards Splash Mountain or Big Thunder, and I saw one of the bears playing checkers on the side of this Frontierland shooting arcade, like with a little girl. And I was like, oh my gosh, what a fun, magical moment. So it seems like Country Bears are out there, they're having fun, but they do get hyped when you know their name. So name drop, name check the Country Bears. Back at when the Christmas parties were happening, now it's a cookie distribution center, but the Diamond Horseshoe Review used to have a dance party.
I loved it. It was so much fun.
That was the first time Doug got to like meet the Country Bears. And I like called Big Al over, and I was like, Big Al, this is your biggest fan. And like he gave him a big bear hug, and it's such a great moment. Like I'm pretty sure Doug is like beaming in this picture with Big Al, and that's one of my favorite Christmas party moments.
So basically, from this first, 20 minutes of this podcast, one thing you should take away, listeners, is go see and love and appreciate Country Bears as much as we do.
I did Diz Twitter's Secret Santa, where you signed up on a Disney Twitter hashtag like site, and you got assigned a Secret Santa, and Doug wanted to play along too, even though he's not super active on Twitter. And his Secret Santa got him a giant Country Bear Jamboree blanket, and it's super fuzzy. and I'm kind of jealous. It has the Sunbonnet Trio, Big Al, Henry, and maybe Trixie. It's beautiful.
Oh, what a great gift for Doug.
I'm like, it's a great gift for me too, but it's for Doug, and I can't steal that blanket. We each have our own blankets when it comes to couch time.
So to wrap up about Country Bears, as I mentioned earlier, we get some more contemporary or newer, quote, Imagineers, and we particularly hear a lot from Tony Baxter. And on page 474, I won't read it because it's pretty long, but between 473 and 474, he talks about how he added the corn stalks to the piano because that was something they remarked that from Marc's drawings, you don't get, obviously it's not 3D. So then when they were staging, they have to consider, well, an audience member is going to be sitting over here. So what does it look like from this angle, even though it's not in Marc's photo or Marc's illustrations? So he added just some like nice designs to the
like a
piano.
pattern.
Yeah, like a pattern. That's a great word to say, because he was concerned about, a lot of the audience is going to look at the piano head on and they're going to miss half of the animatronic because of the back of the piano. So he's like, let's, jazz it up a bit. And Marc almost lost it.
Oh, he was mad.
And so Tony Baxter gives this interesting comparison between working with like Claude Coates and Marc Davis. And I wanted to know, like, what did this, or maybe even another section of the book, tell you about Marc as an Imagineer, as a designer? Like, what did you learn about him?
I'm so glad you put this in our notes, because I actually sticky noted this page when I was reading. I was like, ooh, that's a good quote. And as you said, it's long, but in the middle, he talks about how he had been working more closely with Claude Coates and then kind of got put on assignment with Marc. And he said, when you worked with Claude, you worked with Claude. And you worked for Marc. And I feel like I was like, oh, that's quite a concrete distinction. Brings me back to when we were in college and I had my quote that I would always look into our teaching seminar discussion that was like, there's a difference between group work and teamwork. And it just gave me that vibe. And I don't think that was a dig at Marc as a leader. It's just somebody's work style. So I kind of took it as like Marc was just very meticulous. He took a lot of pride in his work and he wanted to see it. He had a vision and he wanted to see that vision as he laid it out. So as you said in an earlier discussion, he worked really well with Blaine Gibson, who was able to take his drawings and bring them to life. And it sounds like Tony just didn't quite know how to do that to Marc's specifications just yet.
I think it just further emphasizes, too, that I think too often we just group the 9 old men together and forget how distinct all
Absolutely.
of their talents and personalities are. And if anything, that kind of also explains why Walt put them together, because we often hear about Walt as a man who paired people up who were very different, who would clash heads because he thought it produced better ideas. But I think as we constantly just coin, oh, he's one of the 9 old men, we kind of just have a umbrella categorization of, oh yeah, they were animators and designers, and kind of lose some of the personality behind it. So I thought that was just a really interesting comparison.
Yeah, I think that was a great insight, and it was great to see how those Imagineers all came together and reminisced about projects like these. But one of my favorite parts about this book is that the volume heavily featured projects that Marc designed, but just were never realized. I mean, we've talked about concept art for attractions like Pirates or Country Bears or Haunted Mansion. We're like, oh, well, that didn't make it into the ride, but these were just things that straight up never happened. We have Western River Expedition, Garden of the Gods, Yestermorrow, Enchanted Snow Palace. So I'd love to know which of these stuck out to you. What did you find interesting? I mean, like, personally, some of these I had never even heard of. So that's always exciting for me as a Disney fan.
Yeah, there's so much. I think we'll have to talk about Western River Expedition kind of as its own, because that would have, I think, been his crowning glory, because it's probably one of the longest chapters in the book. And there's just so much. And I thought it was so cool how in the beginning of the chapter, chapter 11 is Western River Expedition, that they say that a cast member just found it in the back of...
found the model.
Yeah, the model. Sorry, the plant, like the
The
model
whole
of
ride
it.
is there. Oh my
They
god.
found it. It's underground. No. So the fact that they got all the way through the model stage, like they made it all the way up to where they were about to produce it and then it stopped, but a cast member found it um, adjacent to where Walt's train used to be. I'm trying to see real
So
quick
it was
where it's part of
Walt
the Walt Disney
Disney
story.
Presents, or the Walt. Sorry, I mean now I'm like going to Hollywood Studios. The Walt Disney Story is where Town Square Theater is. So now that's home to Meet Mickey Mouse and Meet Tinkerbell. Tony's Town Square Restaurant is there. But basically that was like the precursor to One Man's Dream. Like I think a lot of the footage is the same, but it was a film about Walt. So it sounded like, you know, when you, even this is now outdated, but when you would go to One Man's Dream, or now Walt Disney Presents, before the show, there were like models of things to come. Like I remember seeing a model of maybe Cars Land. Just
They
like,
also put Galaxy's Edge in there at one point.
yes, you're right. So even up to Walt Disney Presents, like there would be a model like, ooh, and here's what's coming. So it sounded like they briefly had this Western River Expedition model on display, and then they like walled it off, and then it just sat there. And that's
They
always
said even when they found it,
story.
the lights were still plugged
Yes,
in.
I was like,
I'm like, that
who's
is spooky
running
and
up the
amazing all at the same
electricity.
time. But so that one, I think a lot of us would agree, and we can come back to this, would be like the attraction. But one of the other smaller ones, or probably less known ones that I was like, I would have loved this, was the Silly Symphonies attraction. It was just going to be a dark ride of just going through different scenes. It looks like they had, and it featured like all the ones you know, the old mill, the skeleton dance, flowers and trees. I think it went through almost chronologically. They had what this image shows: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 10 or 11 different parts here. And I thought this would be so cool because, one, who doesn't love a good dark ride? And Mark has proven time and again, Pirates of the Caribbean, Jungle Cruise, that he can do a boat ride. This man knows how to make things read in very quick passing. But also, I feel like Silly Symphonies is such an integral part of Disney history. Without the Silly Symphonies, we would not have Snow White, which then builds onto everything else. And they kind of get forgotten of how wonderful they are. And I think that would have been so cool that if it was a ride, how many more people who aren't maybe, you know, the Disney fan level that we are, or a lot of us who might be listening to this podcast are, how many more people would know the Silly Symphonies and appreciate that art.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun to me. And what stuck out, this was I have two. One was an aside called the Fort Wilderness Funhouse, which was an attraction exclusively for the Fort Wilderness campground. And it was going to be the facade of a giant barn. And then kind of like going through a carnival funhouse with like zany, it kind of, you know what it gave me vibes of? Shoot, what is the name? Like the Museum of the Weird that we talked about with Rolly Crump, like his ideas for Haunted Mansion. It was like if you took Museum of the Weird but blended it with Frontierland and just a lot of zany gags. I think that would be so fun for the people at the campground. I kind of liked that it was like, this is an attraction, but it's not in a theme park. Like it's not gate kept in that way. It kind of makes Fort Wilderness a destination in and of itself. So that was cool. That was something I never heard of. But I think if I had to pick one, I really fell in love with the concept of Garden of the Gods. This was something, like you've said, Western River Expedition. We were aware of it. We had interviewed an author who talked about unproduced attractions. That definitely got a lot of length at there. But Gardens of the Gods, I was like, I've never heard of this. And the concept art is so beautiful. It absolutely gives me Fantasia vibes. I mean, like, it's kind of like Fantasia Gardens mini golf, but a ride. Like it has a lot of references to Greek and Roman mythology, but it's a boat ride. There is a boat ride where you kind of go through Gardens of Princess stories in Shanghai, and I kind of saw that as an evolution of this concept, but like classical music would play. So I don't know, I kind of saw it as Fantasia the ride, even though they're not directly linked, but a lot of the concept art reminded me of that, and I think Fantasia is an underappreciated film.
Yeah, the artwork for Garden of the Gods is just beautiful. Like, I kind of feel like it doesn't necessarily have to go. Sometimes when I was thinking of that, I was like, I don't know if this would fit in Disney World or Disneyland, like just the way that I think of like Fantasyland and Disney. But it's a beautiful attraction that I think you could put anywhere. Or it would look great in Epcot, maybe as part of World Showcase of some sort with the culture and the art.
And I liked that we were seeing a different side of Mark. Like, I wasn't in the concept art picking up on, as much as I love his gags and his zany humor, I liked that this attraction was more just like, this is a beautiful, serene, relaxing attraction with great imagery. It was nice to just see maybe like the more refined side of his art.
Yes. So we're going to go back now to Western River Expedition because this is his big, the big like, if only, of Mark's career. But something before we dive into the attraction, what I thought was interesting is this is where I started seeing those connections between like, I think this is where we also start transitioning where Mark's projects start getting shelved more than they used to. Like after Western River Expedition, I think this book mostly goes chronologically. Like we get America Sings, which is great. We get some of his other stuff that makes it into Epcot, or like little things that make it into Walt Disney World as they build Magic Kingdom. But after that, that's where we get the unrealized stuff and building frustrations of his work isn't being produced.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where I started seeing where other Imagineers pick up. So again, Tony Baxter, in this chapter towards the end, he talks about how I like how Tony like became a small champion for Mark. He's like, Tony wanted to see this happen. And when Pirates was getting pushed, which is kind of what made Western River go to the side, was because Florida residents were demanding, or Florida visitors were demanding Pirates. And more e-ticket style attractions, Tony was like, oh, let's put together, this is where we get Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. But the idea was Big Thunder Mountain Railroad would kind of lead you into, now that you've gone on this runaway train ride, go to Western River Expedition and continue the story. And so I saw where he got his inspiration from Mark for Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. So I'm glad a little bit made it, because I do love Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. But this is where I started making that connection, that there's a lot of stuff from Mark that even though Mark's work didn't get produced, other people picked it up. And we'll get to that if we talk about some stuff in Epcot and other attractions.
Yeah, a lot of similarities between Western River Expedition and a piece that we talked about at length in the last episode, which is Pirates of the Caribbean. And we learned in the last volume, like, you know, that's Mark's crowning jewel, but you can definitely see the influences from that. Like, Western River Expedition was supposed to be the Pirates of the Caribbean of Walt Disney World, but it was more of a phase 2 project. You know, they got the park open. It's like, all right, let's, you know, get some revenue coming in, visitors, and then build out that part of the attraction. But when those visitors arrived in 1971, they said, where's Pirates? Like, they'd seen footage of Pirates at Disneyland. Pirates of the Caribbean was something that was promoted, like on the Disneyland Centennial TV show that we talked about, that television special last time. So people had Pirates in their mind, and they got to Walt Disney World, like, where is it? So basically they had to build Pirates instead of Western River Expedition. And I know, you know, we can't always be like, oh, what if this happened? But do you think Western River Expedition would have surpassed it if it were built?
Possibly, because Mark talks, and I think also though it would have been hard because we do have people like me who have never been to both domestic parks. So it might have been hard to compare if one surpasses the other if you don't get to experience both. But you could tell in the way Mark talked about this attraction that he really put everything he learned about creating an experience versus a story between Haunted Mansion and Pirates of the Caribbean, that it's about the experience, not necessarily a continuous story, how to frame scenes quickly because you only have to read them for a certain amount of time before your boat passes it, as well as music from Country Bear Jamboree, like the amount of stuff, this was going to be everything he's learned in his like last 3 attractions put together, which I think would have been really cool. And Tony Baxter, I think even this quote here on page 528, we're quoting Tony a lot today. He says, Mark's crowning glory when I came to Imagineering was the Western River expedition. At lunch, we would scramble to eat so we could go there and walk through the model and just look at it and dream about how cool it was going to be. It was essentially a Western-style version of Pirates of the Caribbean, scene for scene. It had the waterfalls. It had a fire sequence. And instead of drunken pirates, the cowboys were feeling their whiskey. The working drawings were still on bulletin boards all around because we were so heavily into production, so all the story information still needed to be up. The model was 1.5-inch scale of the interior of the ride, and it was lit theatrically so you could get the feeling of show conditions by walking through it. In many ways, it looked better than the Pirates model that Walt showed on television. It was really good. So even other Imagineers, I think, saw that this could have been better than Pirates.
Yeah, we'll never know, but it's great to see so much footage. You know, he references the model in that quote, and there's a lot of pictures. I'm glad that those survived and that they took these up close, beautiful shots of it.
And I think I learned a lot about this attraction because, like you said, when we read, this is also one of my resources, read the book, The Walt Disney World That Never Was, this was a big piece of that book, but it didn't have as much artwork. So it was kind of hard to visualize like what they were talking about. I was like, what do you mean a Western ride in a show building? Like, what? And I like had a hard time visualizing it. So I really like that in this book, maybe it's not as informational about like the background of like what decisions corporate made about why it didn't get made, which the other book gives us. But this gives us a lot of the artwork and what the experience would have looked like.
Yeah, it's a shame that that wasn't the crowning jewel to his career, but he did have such a great career overall.
He did. So another big part of this book is, like I said, I really feel like Western River Expedition is where we start to see this transition, or particularly after America Sings, when we get to Epcot and things that went into Walt Disney World, that we start to see Marc get a little disgruntled. So he officially leaves WED as a full-time employee in March, the end of March 31st of 1978. What did you think about his departure?
I found it really bittersweet and kind of sad. This was something that I wasn't aware of in terms of Marc's experiences. You know, I think often things are presented in such a sunny manner when it comes to Disney, and rightfully so, but I appreciated this book's honesty about his experience and how he felt disgruntled by how things were handled. You know, he's putting out all these, he's being asked to come up with ideas for new attractions all the time, but then as we see, so many of them never get produced, and I feel like he felt really frustrated by that and not being appreciated by management. So it was kind of a dark chapter, but I appreciated it for that element that, in quote, in his own words, he didn't hold back, and neither did his peers. Bob Gurr has a quote in here where, you know, it's Marc's last day, and Bob kind of, you know, he walks him out to his car, and Bob Gurr goes, "See you around," and Marc says, "No, you won't." And Bob's like, "Oh, he really means this." And I was like, "Whew, wow, that carried a lot of weight for me."
And some of the juxtaposition of the artifacts they present here, how we know going into this chapter or going into this part of the book that he's reached his time. He feels like he has, and he's a little uneasy about or unhappy about how he's going out. But then we get the Wedway newsletter is all, "Thank you, Marc, for all you've contributed," and people shower him with gifts and contributions. And even later in other chapters, as like he's been out of WED a little bit longer, it kind of cycles back. That I felt that was kind of bittersweet. Like, people didn't appreciate him maybe when this new, I think it's still a lot of that when Walt passed away, all these new people come in, and what Walt's vision plus versus this new vision is not always in sync. And that's how I think he felt as well. But I did love that a lot of things he said was like, they gave him this great gift that kind of looks like a Muppet.
It does.
Of him.
I thought
and
that
I love
too.
that. And he wasn't like, oh, now you appreciate me. Like, he was not bitter at all of the things that people said to him, but he did remark, I cannot find where it is in the book, that what was hard for him was leaving his coworkers. He wasn't necessarily upset about leaving the company and Disney itself, but he was sad to leave the very imaginative, hardworking people that he was around.
And I appreciated that, we got that kind of like what was officially his final moment with the company, but then it wasn't really. Like, he was brought back as a contractor for Epcot and Tokyo Disneyland especially, where they kind of took a lot of his ideas for Walt Disney World and lifted them for Tokyo Disneyland. People in Tokyo love the Country Bears, from what I've heard. Like, they have so much Country Bear merchandise in Tokyo Disneyland, and post-COVID, definitely on my travel list. But I liked that it didn't end there. Like, it was end of Marc's career, but let's also talk about Epcot. I was like, okay, I'm down for that. Like, it didn't end on a downer, even though it seemed like the timeline was a little unclear. Like, some of the Epcot stuff was before he resigned, but things like Tokyo were after. But I was glad that it was like Marc leaves Wed chapter, and then Epcot / Tokyo Disneyland, so you're not like completely like, oh man, like, he had such a long career, they didn't appreciate him. This is kind of sad.
And I think a lot of that as they kept bringing him back, is as they're building Walt Disney World and expanding Epcot, they're like, it's kind of like you finally recognize when someone's gone, like, what they brought to the table. So I think he really got his praise, and like, people really appreciated him beyond maybe just the Imagineers. Like, Tony already knew this about him, other people he worked with, but maybe some of the other people who came in after him, or just when he was about to leave, who didn't get to work or know him, really valued what he brought when they were like, hey, we need the guy who designed Pirates and Jungle Cruise to come to Walt Disney World and like tell us how to do this. Come to Tokyo and tell us how to do this. And I love the story in Tokyo where they went to the cherry blossoms, like in a park, and they're just hanging out, and Marc's there, and then these people were like, we know you. And he was like, what, really? And he mentions that moment, and also another moment towards the end, when I guess it's really in the 80s where people start knowing Imagineers by name. That he's like, wow, we've never had recognition before. He's like, we're so used to our names being lost under the Walt name. And I was like, that's such a great thing that he got to have that in his life.
I feel that appreciation really comes through in the epilogue, which concludes with a focus on Marc's legacy. So with that in mind, how do you think Marc is remembered by Disney fans today, and what do you think the book wants us to take away?
So I think as Disney fans, we tend to just remember his attractions and remember
Pirates.
Those memorable characters. Yeah, Pirates. Country Bears, if you were unlike me and did know that he did Country Bears, that we tend to say his legacy is creating classic attractions. But I really think coming into this epilogue, both the authors, Pete Docter and Christopher Merritt, they were students of Marc's in some way, and they remark about Marc in the epilogue, how he and Alice loved mentoring new Imagineers and new designers, and even like Tony's lesson of, oh, you worked for Marc, not with Marc, but that was mentorship in its own way. That with, I think the legacy he wants us to get is that so much of Marc in, the Nine Old Men, the root of the Walt Disney era, was still so transformative of the Walt Disney World and Disneyland global Disney attractions we know today.
Yeah, I found the quote that you were kind of referencing in regard to like being recognized for work, and I really feel like that's a big takeaway from the authors for us. Marc says, quote, "It's nice that people recognize our work. It was a very strange business in that we were kept anonymous throughout our entire careers. This didn't make artists who would have liked to have signed their work happy or to see their names just like anyone else. To find out that we're getting credit for what we did is a far cry from the old days when everybody thought Walt Disney did all the drawings," end quote. And that's a sentiment that I've definitely heard. Like, there's only one name on the door. That comes through in Walt's biography, but to have someone be like, well, honest about that, like, hey, like, I'd kind of like some credit. I'm glad that, you know, he lived up to it, a point where he got that credit. The image juxtaposed against that quote on page 736 is Marc Davis, John Hench, and Ward Kimball in a celebration of animation art parade, July of 1996 at Disneyland. Like, they're riding a float, and it's like, hey, these are the people who animated these characters that are surrounding them on the float. So I kind of took that the book wants us to take away that there's real people behind these attractions, behind these animations that you love and grew up with, and Marc is a very special one of those people who contributed to that.
So by the end of reading these 2 volumes, Courtney, like you said, over 700 pages of artwork and quotes and context. How did your perspective of Marc change from volume 1 to volume 2?
I think I really got a more human perspective of Marc in this text, because you get a little bit of the elements where he's disgruntled, where he doesn't feel appreciated, and to see like, oh, like, even at something that people put on as high of a pedestal at Disney, it still has those moments where you're like, well, this is a job. To see that like a little more pulled back behind the curtain is something I appreciated. Like, volume 1 establishes Marc as a Renaissance man. You know, all of his output, it talks briefly about his animation, and it's like, Pirates, Haunted Mansion, here's all these cool things that he did. And this one's like, here's the cool things that he didn't get to do and how he felt about that.
Yeah, I feel like I see Marc from volume 2 become more emboldened, maybe. I feel like in volume 1 he was very modest. A lot of the quotes we talked about in volume 1 where how much credit he was like, this was a team effort, there's a lot of us working here. And then volume 2, he knows what he's worth. And I think he does this in such a great way that we can see an example of a man who knows what he's worth, knows his talents, knows what he's capable of, and can speak to those talents and say, you know, this is what I can do and why you should value me, in a way that I feel like sometimes in society we're like, don't be braggy. But he's a great example of like, you can feel proud and accomplished and ask for your place. So I really see Marc kind of go from volume 1 being this more like, I don't want to say timid, but a more reserved artist who's okay with being part of the team, to I'm going to be a leader and vocalize what I want for the work that I'm creating by volume 2.
I could see that. Well, now I have the toughest question, since we've read 2 volumes. Don't know if anything has changed between those 2 volumes, but do you have an overall favorite attraction from Marc?
This is just so hard.
You wrote the question, Emily.
I know I wrote the question, and I've been pondering this question since I wrote the question.
You had time to prepare.
Week. I did, and I
still hard.
Still am like a little stuck. Okay, so of ones that I've seen, I really think it's either Pirates or Jungle Cruise for me. And I know he didn't create Jungle Cruise, but his upgrades in Jungle Cruise, I just find them so much fun. And like you said, when you take someone for the first time, I've been with many friends, particularly for my college program. People were like, oh, I'm finally gonna go to Disney because I have a friend that works there. And I remember taking friends on those, and they loved those attractions. Like you said with you and Doug, like, I love those attractions more because I got to experience it with someone who had never seen them before. And I see Marc's work really come through in those gags. I think in a way that, like, as much as we love Country Bears, it's more subtle, and you have to understand that humor and that medium to have it click, or you have to see it a few times, whereas Jungle Cruise and Pirates just read so well. But unseen attractions, I really wish I got to see America Sings. it just looks so cool. And that
That's
was
right
I
up
said
your
in
alley.
Volume 1's episode that was an attraction that I was really looking forward to reading, and it was a great chapter. You see all the gags, and that's another one where, you know, we get to see his animatronics and designs in the current version of Splash Mountain, thanks to America Sings, because that's how they repurposed. But I would have loved to have seen the original attraction. From the artwork and his descriptions, it just sounds very, very cool.
It really sounds like something that you'd love given your affinity for history. For me, my answer has not changed in terms of, I've definitely tipped my hand in the last episode, but it is Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean. I mean, like, I love Haunted Mansion as an attraction, but as I said in the last episode, that is essentially all Marc. Not to discredit other people who contributed, like Exitencio's song, or is that Yale Gracie's song? Oh, I'm gonna get my Disney card revoked. There are other Imagineers who contributed to that attraction, but that really was Marc's vision. So to see that come to fruition in Disneyland, it's been relatively untouched aside from throwing Jack Sparrow in a few random spaces. Oh, nope. And they also updated the wench scene, so I can't really say relatively untouched, but for the most part, the integrity of the attraction is still there for me. It's twice as long as the one in Walt Disney World, and I just can't wait for you to experience that on your first trip to Disneyland, which I hope I get to accompany you for.
It should happen in the next 2 years.
I hope so.
If I don't make it there in the next year, I'm promised by my family that my 30th birthday will be going to Disneyland. So if you want to join me,
I'm going to mark March 2022 in my calendar.
So, Courtney, we did it. We read
Yay!
this 2-volume set that we both got almost a year ago.
Pretty much.
Have read. But hey, we did it within the year that we received the book, so I'm proud of us. That was a great 2 volumes, and let's leave our listeners with some other resources about Marc.
Yeah, now that we've made it through both volumes, I wanted to note that our friend Brett Nachman of Notably Disney interviewed one of the co-authors of this text, Imagineer Christopher Merritt. That was also around this time last year, so like right when that book came out. So you can check out that interview in episode 31 of his show. And also you mentioned that we read the Don Hahn... Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the title.
Yesterday's Tomorrow.
Thank you. Yesterday's Tomorrow. That was on Brett's show, so be sure to check out both of those episodes for a little more of a Marc Davis touch.
And we mentioned this briefly once or twice already in this episode, but if you really enjoy this section about unrealized attractions or unrealized attractions in general, we highly suggest the book, The Walt Disney World That Never Was, Stories Behind the Amazing Imagineering Dreams That Never Came to Be by Christopher E. Smith, which, if you did miss it, we actually read his book and interviewed him earlier this year in episode 34.
Was that this year?
It was this year.
Is that like the first episode of this year? Because
it was like the first 3.
Oh.
So take a look at that episode. And then another Disney podcast that I greatly enjoy is the 3028 with Matt Parrish and Kevin Quigley. They've done some episodes on Marc attractions, such as America Sings in episode 51 and Disney's Electrical Water Pageant. That's one we didn't talk about today, on page 99. And finally, some other resources that neither, I don't think Courtney and I have seen. Maybe you have. There's another Disney Editions book about Marc called Marc Davis, Walt Disney's Renaissance Man. And there was also a TV show from the 80s titled The Disney Family Album, and they have an episode featuring Marc, which I haven't watched it, but I did a quick search, and you can find it on YouTube.
We love our YouTube documentaries. And I just checked, and episode 34 was February 19th, 2020. If only we knew then what we know now.
We know now. That was
been
right
a long
before,
year.
Like, podcast. Let's
Quarantine.
do 15 episodes in a row because
we did
have
like
time.
6 episodes in 2
a
months or something like that. Got back on our once a month. But up next, we have a little Christmas bonus in store for you. Our friends over at Chronicle Books were kind enough to send us The Art of Soul and Find Your Spark, a journal of gratitude and self-discovery inspired by Disney and Pixar's Soul. So, as I'm sure many of you plan to do, we are going to watch Soul when it's released on Christmas Day on Disney+, and then we're going to follow up with a discussion of the film and these books before the end of the year, so we get a bonus episode. According to the product descriptions, The Art of Soul presents the story behind this thrilling feature film from Pixar. This companion book features stunning artwork from the film's creation, along with character exploration, storyboards, color scripts, and much more from the creative team. And Find Your Spark is a gratitude journal inspired by Disney and Pixar's film Soul. This guided journal is designed to help you slow down and celebrate a more mindful, joyful, and grateful life. So we look forward to sharing this time with you then and closing out 2020 on a nice note. In the meantime, you can follow Book of the Mouse Club on Twitter and Instagram at Book of the Mouse. Email us with comments or ideas to bookofthemouseclub@gmail.com. And be sure to leave us a review on iTunes so others can find our podcast and read and listen along with us. You can find me, Courtney, on Instagram at GreatGutsby and on Twitter at Courtney_Guth.
And you can find me, Emily, on Instagram and Twitter at the same handle at Emily_McD.
Well, Emily, it's your turn to pick the final quote. I got to do it for the first volume, but I'd love to know how you're going to end out this two-parter for us.
So today's quote is actually the final quote of the book. I thought Marc really summarized his experience and his thoughts really well in his last quote on page 738, the final page of this book. And again, I picked this because I feel like it really spoke to what Marc loved about his work, loved about working at WED, loved about us as fans and theme park entertainment. And it also makes us as fans think about theme park entertainment mediums that are changing. So this is what he says. He says, "I do feel that the term creative means that you come up with an idea, and it doesn't matter what it is or which part of the organization it is. It's the opposite of doing the routine. Excitement to me is in creating something that gives an enormous amount of pleasure. I think it's always exciting to see a good reaction to something you've done, and there's no other place that I can think of that would be quite equal to that. I think that we're finding ways to create a sort of perpetual piece of entertainment that in no way could be produced in any other manner. This is the business we're in. Find an unusual way to do something, but also find an unusual way to do something that we're able to do. And I think that this medium has an evolution of its own. But once you've done it once, you don't have to do it again. What I've done here, you don't have to do again. As far as I'm concerned, there are no rules or regulations on how you do these shows. This has been a very, very exciting experience, and as I say, I am most proud of making a few million people laugh."
A perfect way to end Marc Davis in his own words. So thank you for that, Emily, and we'll see you all in a few weeks.
See you real soon. MARCDAVIS.
Oh, I love it! Book of the Mouse Club has no affiliation with the Walt Disney Company. The views and opinions expressed by hosts and participants are theirs and theirs alone. They do not represent the organizations or companies they happen to work for.